What's up? I know how disappointed you all were when you heard I wasn't going to be in school all week. Because you were going to miss my lit class so much, I went ahead and I recorded notes for you. So you all still get to take notes this week. I know that's going to make you really excited. So let's go ahead and get started. This week, whether or not I'm there, we're learning about the Industrial Revolution. So this is going to be a brand new unit this week, and this is going to go right along with imperialism that we just wrapped up with your essays from last week. So, new page in your notebooks. We took those notes about how to write an essay, and I think those might have been page 29. So I think this might have been page 30, but I could also be wrong about that. So get your page numbered, get this written in your table of contents, and I will also upload this PowerPoint. So if you just want to listen to me talk or pause it and take notes as I go, I don't care which. But when I come back, I expect for you all to have the notes written. So let's go. All right. So the Industrial Revolution, this is huge. This is why we get to live the lives that we get to live today. And compared to someone who lived 300 years ago, our lives are insanely comfortable. So before about 1750, so that's going to be less than 300 years ago, 4 out of every 5 people in the world lived on farms. And that's because they were growing like just a little more food than they needed to live. So you've got some people who live in cities who are basically privileged because they can afford to buy food from the people who live on farms. But then most people are going to have to live on farms because they are growing just enough food to support all the people who are alive. And so this is something that's true no matter where you are in the world. We're going to focus on Europe in this PowerPoint because they're going to be the ones who figure out the steam engine first. So what we're talking about here is an agricultural economy. Agriculture just means farming, and that means before 1750, anyone whose family is not rich is probably going to be working on a farm. Actually, let's talk a little bit more about that. If you imagine a field where you need to plant seeds, the first thing you need to do to that field is you need to break up the soil so that you can drop the seeds into the soil, and the seeds can get down into the dirt where they can actually grow, and water and air can both get down there with the seeds because they need that to grow. Before the Industrial Revolution, if you wanted to do that, the way you did that was with a hoe. And I mean a hoe as in a garden tool. So if you don't know what that is, Google image it, but basically it is a flat piece of metal on a pole. And you're slamming the flat piece of metal into the ground and you're breaking up the dirt. Now imagine doing that to the field the size of a football field or a soccer pitch, or actually many, many, many of those. You're just walking around slamming a hoe into the dirt to break it up so that you can grow stuff. In about 1830, this dude who you've probably heard of named John Deere invents a plow. And all that is a piece of metal that kind of looks like the thing that's on the front of a train. But what you do is you hook it up to a few horses. You have horses pull it. You walk behind it, and you kind of have some handles on it so you can steer the thing. And all of a sudden, you go from having to use a hoe to break up entire fields to being able to just walk them behind a plow. You've got horses or oxes or mule or something doing all the hard work. You just have to walk behind it and steer it. And so you go from needing hundreds of people to work on a farm, and this is just the first part of it, just planting the seeds, to break up the soil to plant the seeds, to needing just a few people to walk behind plows. And so this is the kind of change we're talking about. We go from needing almost all of the world's populations to work on farms to today in America, it's something like 3% of our population still has to work on farms. And so I'm sure you all have seen videos with these big, big, big machines that farmers are driving around, like way bigger than even tractors, that are planting seeds or breaking up soil or harvesting things. And that's going to be the changes we see in the Industrial Revolution. So we've hit our second point here. New technology slowly replaces hand tools. Fewer farmers can grow more food. And at the time, that's kind of a bad thing for the people living on farms because all of a sudden they're out of a job. They have lived on farms their whole lives, their parents, their grandparents. This is the way of life that they know. And whoever it is that's owning the farm is like, hey, I don't need you anymore. Bye. And so these people have to go and they have to find somewhere different to work. And what ends up happening is they end up moving to cities. This is a vocab word. I can't believe it's not on this slide. It might be on the next one. If it's not, I'll have you write it down the next time I'm there. This is called urbanization. So urban just means city, and urbanization means we start to see lots and lots and lots of people move to cities because there just aren't jobs on farms anymore. Once they get to the cities, they're going to be looking for work. And the good news for them is going to be the same reason they lost their job on the farm, which is going to be the invention of new machines, means that there are new jobs for them in the city. And these are going to be in these brand new things where lots of people are working and lots of stuff getting made called factories. So we're going to start talking about the factories. The first industry, and industry with that we mean like what you make. So the first industry to industrialize, the first industry to start using factories was the textile industry. Textile is a really common word around here because about 50 years ago, or for hundreds of years before that, in North Carolina, the textile industry was huge here. What that means is you are using cotton to make clothes. So textiles are made out of cotton. The textile industry is the first industry to industrialize. On the next slide, we're going to talk about the names of the two machines that they come up with that just completely changed the way that people can make clothes. But once these new machines come out, we see that one machine can do the work of about 50 spinsters. And you might say, so a spinster is someone who makes yarn. And you might say, hey, wait a minute, Mr. Buczek, you just said there were going to be new jobs. This makes it sound like there's way fewer jobs. Well, no, because what happens is because fabric becomes way cheaper to make, it means that there is more demand for clothes because more people can all of a sudden afford clothes. Before the Industrial Revolution, if you were middle class, you might have had like 2 or 3 outfits. You would have had like your spring and summer outfit and your fall and winter outfit, and that's it. And if you were poor, you probably had like 1 outfit. So here's something that kids are always excited to learn. When underwear was invented, it was not invented to protect your body. It was invented to protect your clothes from your body. Because basically people figured out if I ruin a small amount of fabric, that is way easier and cheaper to replace than if I ruin all of my clothes, which is a large amount of fabric. So that's the reason that was originally invented. Not to protect your body, to protect your clothes from your body. But now that we have these machines that can make fabric, there's going to be a huge, huge, huge increase in demand for clothes, and it's why we all have closets full of clothes at home, and we can be wearing different outfits every day. That did not used to be like that. If you were poor, you literally probably had 1 not even outfit. Imagine like a gown or a shirt and a pair of pants, and that's it. All right, so let's go on to the next slide. So on the left, when I said that one machine could do the work of 50 spinsters, on the left, that is a spinning wheel. You've probably seen it in like fairy tales or old-timey movies or something. But what that does is that takes raw wool and it spins it together into yarn. Once we start getting machines that can do this, on the left, this is a machine that can do that, and you can see how much more wool that machine can accommodate than that one spinning wheel. So that machine's called a spinning jenny, and that's going to be able to make about 50 times the amount of wool as the spinning wheel in the left picture. So The machines that I don't have pictures of here for you, but you'll see them in just a minute, is going to be the flying shuttle. And so the flying shuttle is going to be for cotton textiles. That's going to be for weaving. So if you look at fabric on the shirt that I know you all are wearing, because I know you all are in dress code today. So like your polo shirt, if you look at that, that's going to be cotton threads that have been woven together. And what that means is that means someone lined up all these cotton threads parallel and then took a cotton thread perpendicular and wove them over and under and over and under and over and under. A flying shuttle is a machine that does that automatically, and you can imagine how long it would take to make, like, imagine a bed sheet if you're doing that by hand versus if you have a machine doing it. So let's take a look. Oh, sorry, I think I've already said this. So the increase in production means lower prices. There's all of a sudden a lot more yarn, and there's all of a sudden a lot more fabric. And that means those things are going to be less rare, and if something is less rare, its price goes down. And so with those prices going down, more and more people are going to be able to afford more and more clothes. And so we've already talked about the demand of cotton. So while slavery was still a thing here in the United States, this is where all that cotton that slaves in the southern states, including North Carolina, were harvesting was going. A lot of it was being sold to England because England is the first country to build textile factories. When America has the Civil War, that does not mean people in England and France and Germany stop wanting clothes. And so those countries look for new places to get cotton from, and I already told you that imperialism and this are happening at the same time. So that's one of the reasons England's going to go take over India and basically treat people there like slaves and make them harvest cotton. Same thing, we talked about the Maji Rebellion last week. That was happening in German East Africa, where people were being forced to harvest cotton. Same reason, Germans wanted to be using it in textile factories. All right, so the flying shuttle on the left is a primary source, and that's why it looks like it has so many pixels. All right, so I think I was talking about why that picture looks like it has so many pixels. It's a primary source. And what it does is it shows a guy weaving by hand. You can see how his hand is kind of right here. There we go. He's holding a needle. And he's got all of this thread, if you look down like where his knees should be, lined up. And all of that is parallel thread. And he's taking that one piece of thread that's attached to the needle in his hand. He's going over and under and over and under and over and under all of these pieces of thread. So on the right, I have a modern picture of women doing that. They are making an oriental rug. And so one of the reasons these rugs are thousands of dollars is because they are woven by hand. And so that's exactly what those women are doing. You can see how they have their yarn, their white yarn parallel, and they're weaving colored yarn. And it's this same thing, over and under and over and under. And it would take forever. So what the flying shuttle is going to be is the flying shuttle is going to be a piece of wood that has a spindle of thread on it. And what it does is if you have all of these parallel pieces of yarn, it's going to separate them. And then it's going to have one piece of yarn on it, or thread, and it's going to go through that separated thread. Then it's going to separate them in the opposite direction, like that. And it's going to go back through. And so you can start weaving really quickly instead of doing it by hand, and that's going to allow people to create huge sheets of fabric way faster. All right, so here's the flying shuttle. Here it is on the right, like I said, just a piece of wood with a spindle of thread in it. And then the machine that's on both the left and the right, what that does is that separates every other piece of thread. And so when that happens, the flying shuttle is going between the separated thread, and then the machine will separate the thread in the opposite direction. The flying shuttle will go back through. And so that allows you to weave things just thousands of times quicker than you could be doing it by hand, and that's what leads to this increase in the amount of fabric we have. All right, so we've talked about factories. We've talked about the first industry to industrialize, the textile industry. Now we're going to talk about transportation. We actually talked about this a little bit with imperialism and why it was the Europeans couldn't take over Africa prior to the 1800s. I asked you literally this question in most of your classes. What was the fastest mode of transportation for the vast majority of human history? And the answer is by horse. But with the Industrial Revolution, with the invention of the steam engine, that's going to change. So, steam engines make trains possible. We've already learned about locomotives. We've already talked about how that works. That is why you have both steam and smoke coming out of the old-timey engines of trains. That's because the steam is coming from the pistons, and the smoke is coming from the coal that's being burned to boil the water to move the pistons to move the train. All right, so the dude who invented the continual motion steam engine is James Watt. And so what that means is people had already figured out how to use one piston and push it out using steam. But no one had figured out how to automatically make it go back in, and then back out and back in the way locomotives work. And so that's called the continual motion steam engine, and that's what James Watt's famous for figuring out. If you think about how light bulbs are measured and how bright they are, they're measured in watts. And so that's named after James Watt because he's a famous dude for figuring out the steam engine. All right, now I want you to think about if we have trains all of a sudden, if we have these trains that can be moved with these locomotives, what else do we need so trains can get places? And the answer is going to be rails. All right, for every train, for every mile a train can go, you actually need 2 miles of steel rails because you have to have 2 of them. So think about the tens or hundreds of thousands or even millions of miles of steel rails that would have to be created for us to get these trains that are going to go all over the Americas, all over Europe, and even all over Africa and Asia. All of this is going to be happening during the 1800s. In about 1870, America completes what's called the Transcontinental Railroad. And that means we have a railroad track that goes from New York to California. That's about 3,000 miles. And that means you need 6,000 miles of steel rail. This means you need a huge, huge, huge production of steel. Now, you cannot just dig steel out of a mine and just have steel. That's not how that works. What you're digging out of a mine is you're digging iron out of the ground. You take iron out of the ground, and the iron isn't as strong as steel. So the way you make steel is you melt iron down and then pour it into molds. And then that mold needs to be in whatever shape you want it to be. So in this case, railroad tracks. Once the iron turns from a liquid back into a solid, it will have undergone a process that allowed oxygen to escape from it. And so as steel, the atoms will be closer together, so it'll be a harder substance. And so steel is going to be really, really, really important for the Industrial Revolution, for things like steel boats. It's during this time that we stop making boats out of wood. And especially for railroads. You need steel to make train tracks. You need trains to get around in a way that's faster than horses. All right, the last thing we're going to do today is we're going to talk about how we break up the Industrial Revolution. And this just means the stuff that people are inventing. The first phase of the Industrial Revolution is called the textile phase. And because it's the first one, I just spent a whole bunch of time talking about it. So you can see the years right there, 1780 to 1850. Steam engines are used to produce cotton textiles, and what that means is instead of even having people using spinning jennies or flying shuttles, you hook steam engines up to those things. And so instead of humans doing it, instead of hand power, you have machines doing it. Machines can do it 20 or 50 or 100 times faster than humans can, and that's just going to lead to a massive output in the amount of fabric and textiles that we have. What that means, at the end of the day, people have more clothes in their closets. All right, England, Britain, the United Kingdom is the first nation to industrialize. That means they are the first nation to build factories, and for a very long time, they're going to be the world leader. You're going to see other nations in Europe do this after them, particularly France and Germany. You're also going to see the northern United States do it. Places like New York and Chicago and Pittsburgh are going to become famous for their factories. All right, we already touched on this, Because we can suddenly make clothes a lot quicker, that means we need a lot more cotton. And so particularly while slavery is still a thing, we're getting a lot of that cotton from the United States. Once slavery stops being a thing, they want to look somewhere else for cheap cotton, because obviously cotton's still available from America, but because you actually have to pay the people who are getting it, it becomes more expensive. And so that's why Europeans go to India, where we already talked about how Indians are basically being used as slaves, and they don't have to be paid. So you can still get the cheap cotton, which means cheap clothes for Europeans. All right, next phase is going to be the metallurgical phase. That just means metal. I already talked a little bit about how you turn iron into steel. And so when we say mineral ores, we're talking about iron, and metal products. In this case, we're talking about steel, but anything that can be made out of metal. All right. The process to make steel, because of these factories, becomes really cheap. And it has to, because think about all the things that are being made out of steel. And again, the best example I can use is we get thousands of miles of railway rail. And if you ever go and walk past a railroad track and look at the rail, those things are not small. And we need thousands and thousands and thousands of miles of that. So we have tons of steel mills cranking this stuff out. All right, so we already talked about that guy. The next step, and you're not going to see this until the late 1800s, are going to be steel-framed buildings. Before steel, the tallest building you could build was, in most cases, 3 stories. Sometimes they might get up to 5 stories, but the ceilings would be really low. Brick and wood just can't stand that tall. And so once we have steel frames, that's going to be much stronger than either brick or wood. We can start building buildings that are 5 or 10 or 15 or 20 stories safely. Obviously, today we have buildings that are more than 100 stories. That is because of steel. Now, we also talked about this word a little bit earlier, urbanization. That means people moving to cities. Because we can build buildings with steel frames, we can fit more people into the same area. Because instead of building neighborhoods out, if we can only build buildings that are 1 story or 2 stories high, we can start building neighborhoods up. We can build apartment buildings that are 3 or 5 or 10 stories tall, which means we can fit a lot more people into the same amount of space. All right. Here's this word. I knew I had it defined in these notes. Urbanization, people moving from the country to the cities. We already talked about why they do that. There are no longer jobs on farms because of the Industrial Revolution. All right, next phase. It's going to be the chemical phase. And this is a big deal because people are going to start figuring out chemistry. So, chemical fertilizers are going to improve agriculture again. This means that you can grow way more plants in the same amount of space with less effort. It's basically steroids for plants. And that's going to be, there's fewer jobs for farmers. More and more farmers are going to move to the city. During this time, we're also going to see the invention of things like natural gas. In that case, that's not an invention. It's how we use it. That is like propane. So we're going to see the beginning of gas lamps, things like propane for lamps. Petroleum, that means gas you put in your car. So if you've ever heard of the gas station BP, that actually means British Petroleum. And if you go to Europe, they won't talk about putting gas in their car. They will talk about putting petrol in their car. It's just short for petroleum. Explosives. During this time, this guy who you've probably heard of invents dynamite. And he did it because he wanted to make it safer for miners. He wanted to make a way for them to break apart stone in mines. So he invented dynamite. Now, he was actually like a pacifist. He did not like war. And so one of his goals here was to save the lives of miners. Instead, what happens, because humans are the worst, is humans started throwing dynamite at each other. And it became a tool of war. And people were dying because of it. This guy felt terrible about that. And so all the money he made from dynamite and continues to make from dynamite, he donated to the cause of peace. So this dude's name was Alfred Nobel. And the Nobel Prize, the Nobel Peace Prize that you've probably heard of, is paid for with money he made from inventing dynamite. All right, other stuff that's invented during this phrase. We have oil for lubrication. So basically, this is the oil you're putting in your car engine. Engines heat up because of friction. You have metal rubbing against each other. Think about these pistons that we've already talked about. That's going to be metal inside of metal cylinders, and they're rubbing against each other. Lubricating oil is going to reduce friction, which reduces heat, which makes engines run better. And so that's a really, really, really big deal. We also see asphalt as a way of paving places. Prior to this, they actually used wooden bricks to pave in some cities. You also probably know what cobblestone is, or just normal bricks. But asphalt's going to make it much easier to pave roads. You're going to see way more paved roads. We're also going to see medicines. This is the first time people come up with aspirin. This is the first time people come up with anesthetics. What that is that's like Neosporin, what you put on a cut so it kills the germs so you don't get an infection and die. So that's going to be a really big deal. It's going to lead to more people. All right, last phase is going to be the electrical phase. By the 1890s, we are figuring out how to use electricity. So you've heard of Thomas Edison and the light bulb. We get two things here. One, we figure out how to run machines with electricity instead of steam engines. That's going to be a big deal because we can stop burning coal and polluting our entire cities. Later this week, I'm going to have you do an assignment that's going to talk about how polluting coal was from the steam engines. So if you've seen smokestacks, these big brick towers with this big black smoke coming out of it, that's from burning coal. I know you all read A Christmas Carol earlier this year in your ELA class, and it talked about Cratchit begging Scrooge for more coal for heat. He was burning coal, and he had a chimney with dark black smoke coming out of it that he was polluting London with, just like every single other factory and person in London. We're also going to see the electric light, which is going to be a really big deal. We will come back and we will talk about more of the effects of electricity. So this should have been one class period. I see that this is only 30 minutes long. You have hour-long classes. So you should absolutely have gotten this watched. You should have got your notes done. And I'm also going to have another assignment for you on Canvas to finish. These are your only notes for the week. Please make sure you are getting all of your work in. If you take this week off in my class, if you have a sub who lets you on your cell phone and you're just going to sit and you're going to be on your cell phone, or you're going to be playing games on Cool Math Games, or whatever it is you do, you are going to come back next week. I'm going to tell you, you have like 5 missing assignments. I have stuff for you to do every day. You need to make sure that you are being responsible with your work and getting your work done, even though I am not there. All right, have a great week. Please get your work done for me. I will see you next week, Monday.